I led a double life, being a virtuous wife and mother by day, and a secret lover by night. I thought I could perfectly balance it all until my husband exposed all my lies at the most vulnerable moment. Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. He overheard my acquaintance insult him and confess that the child is not his. He got his revenge some days later. I am a 30-year-old female married to a 41-year-old male. My daughter is 7 years old. Unfortunately, on my 30th birthday, my life transformed into a tense and thriller drama that I had not anticipated. My husband discovered some shocking details about our marriage, which resulted in a dramatic change of events in my life. For my own sanity and safety, let me address my boyfriend and husband as such. It's easier that way than trying to remember my dupe names my way. I can avoid any potential mistakes or confusion in my lengthy diatribe, which I don't want to get out of hand. I can also ensure that my thoughts and sentiments are communicated clearly and without unnecessary hassles. It also allows me to keep focused on the topic I want to convey without interruption. Samantha was my best buddy from high school. We had become inseparable since then, and had done a lot of stupid things together. I had invited her over because my husband was abroad and my kid was having a sleepover at her grandparents' house. Samantha and I were hanging out at home, drinking and talking about everything that had happened to us since high school. We recalled all of the silly and insane things that had happened to us throughout the years. I'm not sure if it was the wine or the fact that we had a lot of time on our hands to discuss topics we hadn't talked about in a long time. We were having a lot of fun, since there were things we had almost forgotten about. It was a nostalgic walk down memory lane, reminiscing about the good old days and laughing at our previous pranks. It felt like a much-needed reprieve from our hectic schedules, allowing us to reconnect and bond over our common experiences. Samantha told me how I frantically contacted her when I found out about my pregnancy, worried that it wasn't my husband's, which turned out to be accurate. My spouse had no idea. I cheated on him and became pregnant. My best friend, Samantha, was the only one who knew about my affair and pregnancy, because she always covered for me whenever I was with my lover. Samantha was my rock throughout the journey, providing emotional support and counsel when I most needed it. I knew I could always count on her to keep my secrets secure and lend a listening ear when I was feeling uneasy. My husband had arranged a large, elaborate surprise for my 30th birthday, and I was really enthusiastic about it. I overheard him mention that he wanted it to be extremely shocking. It was tough for me to keep a straight face during the week, knowing that I was about to receive a great surprise that I had been looking forward to. I began throwing hints about what I wanted as a gift, hoping that everything would fall into place perfectly. The big day had finally arrived and I was really excited. My spouse had made awful coffee for me and it all started there. It was wonderful. Furthermore, I appreciate how he went above and beyond to make it look more romantic. I could immediately tell how much effort he had gone into making this the most memorable day of my life. As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't help but be filled with appreciation for having such a kind companion. The day got off to a great start, laying the groundwork for what was sure to be an amazing celebration. I made a mental note to demand something similar from my partner when we meet next week to celebrate my birthday. The evening arrived and I received a message instructing me to go to a private designer to get prepared for the function. This was not what I expected. When I arrived, I was treated like a queen, with special attention paid to my appearance. The designer had chosen a magnificent gown that fit me wonderfully, and I felt like royalty as I walked out for the evening function. The attention to detail and care done in getting me ready for the occasion made me feel very unique and grateful for the opportunity. I was urged to wait for additional notes with directions on how to really enjoy the night. I couldn't help but wonder what else could possibly top this. but I was eventually sent a note informing me that a car was waiting to transport me to my destination. It was a limousine with champagne and food to go with it. I was overjoyed that my spouse went to such great lengths to make my birthday a royal celebration. I walked in and was blown away with the design and decorations. It looked like a wedding, not a birthday party. I could see close friends and relatives, as well as a few colleagues from work who had attended the celebration. I saw my hubby on stage heralding my arrival. Everyone was staring at me and I could tell they were impressed by my appearance. I noticed Samantha up front, who gave me a reassuring glance, which translated into me looking extremely sexy. I walked onto the stage as told and was placed in the center, where there was a presentation featuring a trip down memory lane about how we met. I got into a relationship snippets of our marriage, followed by my pregnancy and birth. It proceeded with our first days with our daughter, and I was already in tears, as I saw how much effort my husband had put in to make this the most unforgettable day of my life. I couldn't help myself. I hurried up to him and embraced him in my arms. He stated there was more to come and that I should reserve my feelings for later. I couldn't imagine what he might have done to top this. Nonetheless, I knew it would be overwhelming. I kissed my daughter, who was also involved in the preparation with my husband, and took my seat as my husband had requested. I was blindfolded and instructed to sit on stage where everyone could see me. I waited for something to happen. I felt something approaching my lips and assumed he was just trying to kiss me. I kissed him back, my blindfold was removed and I saw my beloved, the father of my daughter, standing in front of me passionately kissing me. My spouse was standing in the corner, simply chilling and watching everything as if he knew. He began proclaiming that he would like to properly introduce the person kissing his wife. To anyone who appeared perplexed, he said to applaud. The man who was the father of his wife's daughter. He was the one who gave her the joy of motherhood. My face plummeted and became pale. My secret affair had been exposed and the consequences of my actions were about to unfold in front of. Everyone in the room fell silent, as the truth sank in, and I knew that my life would never be the same again, and that I could not utter a single word from my mouth, as I was too astonished to speak. All eyes were on me and I realized at that point that the entire week's build-up was intent to humiliate me in front of everyone I'd ever known. My heart was hammering in my chest as I struggled to gather my thoughts and formulate a response. The weight of the situation was oppressive and I could feel heat rising to my cheeks as I searched for an escape. My husband then admitted that he was so ignorant and had blinded my trust that he never imagined his wife would cheat on him. When I had Samantha over, he arrived home early to surprise me, but we were so caught up in our chat that we didn't notice my husband had snuck in and overheard my entire conversation with Samantha. I had no idea until he confessed that he knew the truth about my adultery and my friend's constant assistance. That was when he realized he needed to teach me a lesson. I hadn't seen it coming. I attempted to find Samantha in the crowd, but my eyes were blurry from the tears streaming down. I watched my kid sobbing and clutching my husband close to her, as if she was asking him to protect her from me. I had a sudden disgust for myself at that point. I recognized my actions had brought anguish to the people I cared about the most. The weight of my mistakes struck me like a ton of bricks and I realized I had to make things right instantly. My husband then proceeded to tell me that I was such a shameless mother that I made a contract with my lover to prolong the affair if he had nothing to do with our daughter. I was willing to give up my own kid for my happiness, while continuing to lie and cheat on my husband about her. I was astonished and wounded by his claims, which were entirely true. I refused to quit my partner, and even agreed to lie to my husband about it being his child in order to continue my affair. I could see everyone's disgusted expressions and judgmental looks. The disclosures left my family crushed and distraught. I knew it would be difficult for me to get them to understand anything. I realized I had nothing to say in my defense, because my spouse had never treated me badly, except for the fact that I required sexual pleasure. I had no problems with my marriage. He adored my kid like she was his own, and he never doubted that he was not the father. I felt guilty and ashamed for breaching their confidence, but I also realized I needed to be open about my needs and desires. It was a challenging conversation, but I hoped that they would eventually understand and forgive me. The party finished and everyone began to leave. My husband informed me that I could go with my lover, since there was no place for such a selfish person in his home. He wanted to keep me away from our kid, because he didn't want me to take advantage of her again. I was just sitting on the chair, still absorbing what had transpired. I couldn't believe that a simple journey down memory lane could result in such a devastating turn of events, turning my life upside down after such a long period. I looked about but couldn't find anyone. I tried phoning Samantha and my lover, but they both ignored me. I went to a nearby motel and remained overnight. The next morning I tried to call my sweetheart, who eventually answered. After 2 hours, he informed me that I had caused him so much trouble, and that the only reason he continued to have this affair was to keep the fact that we had a daughter a secret forever. Now that it was out in the open, he had no desire to interact with me, cut all ties quickly. I tried phoning, since I knew she was the only one who could understand me. She kept declining my calls, which made me reconsider our connection. She was the only person who knew the truth about my pregnancy and my daughter's biological father. She texted me that she would be unable to assist me at this time, since her spouse had begun to lose trust in her. Once things were under control, she would definitely contact me. At this point, I realized that I was left utterly alone to deal with the catastrophe I had caused in my own life. I recognized that no one else could fix the problem for me, and that I had to accept responsibility for my acts and make things right by myself. It was a sobering realization, but one that I needed to face in order to develop and learn from my mistakes. So here I am writing this post to feel better and gain clarity in my life. Maybe doing this would help me reflect on all that went wrong and make better judgments in the future. I would want to beg that individuals who read this post refrain from passing judgment on me and instead offer constructive ideas on how I should handle this scenario update, because many people were curious about how things turned out. Here is a brief summary of what happened next. I was saddened because I couldn't sleep for several nights, since every time I closed my eyes, I could picture my daughter's contempt for me. Every day, I would go to her school and wait for a chance to see her and talk to her. She would always avoid me and move away, as if I were a stranger. I felt like an absolute failure. As a parent, I am unable to rebuild the shattered relationship with my own child. The sting of rejection was awful, but I knew I needed to keep trying to make things right. It's as if I thought that making up with my husband would help me reconcile with my daughter. I may not have been a very good wife, but I adored my daughter and couldn't bear her indifference to me. I knew that the more I waited, the further away she would get from me. I decided to take the first move and contact my husband to begin healing our relationship. I believed that by demonstrating that I was capable of making amends, my daughter would see me in a new light and be eager to reconcile with me. I made my way to the house where my spouse had moved with our daughter. My mother-in-law was assisting him in caring for our daughter, who was still too young and needs supervision. I knew that talking to her would be pointless because she had disliked me from the start. I texted my spouse that I needed to talk about our daughter and that I would meet him at a nearby cafe. I realized that this was the only way I could persuade him to meet me. After about 30 minutes he arrived. I got his favorite coffee and invited him to have a seat. He seemed disinterested and asked me to get to the point. I began by asking him if our kid was okay and how she was doing at school. He assured me that he would take care of it and that I should stick to what I had come to say. I took a big breath and began my pitch to start over. I told him that our daughter was too young to deal with all of this unwarranted stress. Perhaps we could reach an agreement and start over as a family. I underlined the importance of our daughter's well-being and how we needed to set aside our differences. For her sake, I recommended that we seek therapy or mediation to come up with a solution that would benefit everyone. He started giggling after hearing my 10-minute monologue. He stated he already knew I didn't care about the marriage or the relationship, so I shouldn't try to fool him anymore. He asked me to drop the pretense of wanting to be a wife and mother and start over. He told me that my ego was bruised because my own daughter had nothing to do with me. He urged that I get therapy to resolve my concerns and become a better person. His remarks cut home, making me realize how my actions affect those around me. He told me that he now knows everything about me and has no reason to trust me. There was no way he could keep his daughter apart from him. This had made me lose my cool, and I told him that she was not his real daughter, and he could not keep me, his biological mother, away from her. He promised me that he would battle with all of his might to keep me away from her. Saying this, he stormed off in a rage, and I was furious with the way he addressed me. I'm not sure how my attempt to reconcile morphed into an ego challenge, with both of us emphatic about who gets to retain our daughter. It was a tragic situation that rapidly escalated, leaving us both hurt and misunderstood. Despite our differences, I am hopeful that we can find a way to prioritize our daughter's well-being above all else. I received a court notification for divorce, which I expected. I also received custody trial paperwork for my daughter. I knew I wasn't going to win the divorce battle at all and reconnect. I wanted to obtain custody of my daughter and prove to my husband that, no matter how hard he tried, I was still her biological mother. As expected, I lost the divorce case with no alimony due to my infidelity. I was kind of expecting this outcome, so it didn't surprise me as much. The court trial for custody has begun. It was a messy affair. There were charges that I was concealing the fact that I was aware from the start of my pregnancy that this kid was not my husband, and I'm still fooling him. After all these years, emotions ran high as the truth emerged in court, with both sides presenting proof to back up their allegations. The judge's decision would ultimately determine the fate of the child caught in the midst of this chaotic circumstance. My husband had given documentation that I was an irresponsible mother who frequently left her daughter at her grandparents' house to meet with her lover. My husband was still responsible for my daughter's expenses and livelihood, so there was no reason for me to seek custody, even though he knows she is not his daughter. This demonstrates that he is a caring dad and the child is more comfortable remaining with him. I didn't have a steady income or a decent place to live with a child, so I couldn't be trusted with one. What if I ran away with my lover, leaving my daughter at home alone? I didn't have anything to counter it, apart from the fact that I adored my daughter. She was biologically mine. I was devastated at the end of the trial when the judge and jury determined that I was unfit to care for my own daughter. The conclusion was that love is not always sufficient to provide a stable and secure environment for a child. It is critical to prioritize the child's well-being and best interests above all else. In this case, it may be necessary to seek legal advice and discuss custody arrangements. My lover, the biological father, had objected to caring for me and my daughter because I had never asked him to take on the role of father. He played a record recording in which I boasted about how I had duped my husband and he would never have to worry about caring for my daughter. As long as my husband remained unaware, that was the only reason he continued to have an affair with me. He never wanted to be a father. I knew this would present a very unfavorable picture of me, implying that I had never cared about my daughter's well-being before she was born. It turned out just the way I didn't want. The trail left me broken. I have no one to share my emotions with. My girlfriend had left me claiming that I had suddenly become too clinging and needy. He wanted no strings attached, and now I'm pulling him into my own problem, expecting him to be the father he never wanted to be. He didn't want anything to do with this situation, and requested me to keep away from him. I felt lost and abandoned, with no one to rely on for comfort or support. The pain of rejection was excruciating, and I sought to find a way to recover from my loss. I tried to reach out to Samantha for consolation, but she began ignoring me. She then texted me saying her husband had told her to keep away from me because I was in trouble. They had been having trust issues ever since my affair came to light. She apologized for not being there for me, but she had no other alternative if she wished to save her own relationship. I was wounded by her response, but I saw that she needed to prioritize her marriage. It was a challenging situation for both of us, but I accepted her decision to prioritize rebuilding her relationship with her husband. I didn't want to cause difficulties in anyone else's lives anymore. Right now, all I feel is loneliness, guilt and depression about my life. I continually question my decisions and feel overwhelmed by the weight of my emotions. It's difficult to see a path out of this darkness, but I know I must find a way to heal and move on. I need to attempt to be strong and make amends with my daughter. So gradually but steadily, I am strengthening my bond with my kid. I need to get guidance and support from loved ones, or a therapist to go through these emotions and develop healthier coping skills. Taking little actions towards self-care and forgiveness can help me gradually recover my self-esteem and connection to others. Thank you for being a part of my journey thus far. I know I am to blame for my demise, and I am fully aware of the consequences of my actions. I don't want any more hate or ideas that I deserve everything. I am taking responsibility for my faults and attempt to make things right. Your encouragement and understanding mean everything to me as I work to grow and learn from this experience. Here is the next story. I was staring at my computer when she came in. She had been arriving home late from work for a long time, but today was different. It was almost 10:00. The kids and I had already eaten dinner, finished our homework, and been in bed for about an hour. They didn't even ask about Mom. This new regimen made me unhappy. I spent the last hour studying our finances, which had worsened considerably over the previous 2 years. Our income had reduced drastically, but my wife didn't notice and continued to spend freely. I just completed paying my bills. We might be able to get by for another few months. I was also analyzing my life plan, wondering if I had made any mistakes for the past 2 years. I had stared at a ticking time bomb, always expecting it to go off, but now I was starting to question it. I'm not sure how long she stood there watching me. I had recently become increasingly engrossed in my own thoughts. I'm losing track of time. Finally, she crossed her arms with a familiar look of disgust on her face. She spoke. Daniel, I want a divorce. I didn't know how I felt at the time. I was nearly numb from uncertainty and self-loathing. I tried not to chuckle, even if it wasn't particularly humorous. My 17-year marriage had just disintegrated, shattering everything we had achieved together. I hadn't felt this emotion in a long time, and it almost made me smile relief. I glanced at her for a time, remembering our joyful times. One more time, then I snapped back into reality. Okay, I excelled at programming rather than management. Unfortunately, programmers are promoted to project managers, department directors, and executive positions. That is how I became a senior product development manager. A posh term for a salesman. I was the best qualified at the moment. I had nearly single-handedly designed our flagship product line and steered it through 6 upgrades, so I understood everything about it, could answer customer concerns and address employee issues. With a fresh haircut and an expensive suit, I looked the part, but the higher income and benefits were insignificant. I was generally pleased with my job, but I missed programming. With so many meetings and phone calls, my role didn't allow for any coding. I observed as young coders competed with new innovation. Being the boss has its advantages, but I wished my position were different. It was unsurprising that I was dismissed from Chicago Technology Solutions. I would have fired myself too. I rarely attended meetings and frequently missed deadlines. I wasn't trying to get fired and I wasn't wanting to keep my job. I felt depressed for several months. It took over 3 months to go forward, then another month to find a viable answer. My children helped me stay sane. Their pattern of breakfast, school snack, homework, dinner and bedtime became my mantra and helped me get my life back on track. I relished being a stay-at-home dad handling all household and transportation responsibilities. The children liked my presence, which made me realize how valuable I am. My wife did not seem to notice the change in our household dynamics. I met Jennifer Riley at a fraternity party that I nearly skipped. I joined the fraternity for post-graduation chances not to party. My academics was superb, but everything else about me, height, weight, appearance and personality, was average. Even my name, Daniel, was the most common from 1961 to 1988. Away from the computer. I was not exceptional. I had a few relationships, but mainly kept to myself. That changed after I met Jennifer Riley. Jennifer was similarly average, but I noticed that typical women looked much better. She was rather reserved after observing her for a while. I eventually talked to her. Our initial meeting was quick, but it resulted in coffee and study meetings over the next 3 weeks. After nearly 2 months, we finally had our first genuine date from that point forward. It was the best time of my life. We lived happily for 15 years. Our romance and engagement were brief. After graduation, we married and moved into our first Chicago apartment. We commuted together to our first jobs, barely making ends meet, but content. Together we shared practically everything about our family's interests and objectives. Where one lacked, the other excelled. I handled our finances. Jennifer managed our social and family routines. We soon improved our life by being promoted, growing our social circle and saving for a house, while still traveling and having fun. Jennifer left her job after 8 years. Our son, Jacob, arrived a year later, followed by our daughter, Emily. We relocated to a 3-bedroom suburban home, adopted a dog and purchased a family vehicle and minivan. Our life was completely average: 2 children, a pet, a house and 2 automobiles. I didn't think I could be happy. I was mistaken. I was promoted to manager shortly after Emily celebrated her first birthday. It seemed like a reward for years of being overlooked and not complaining. The new compensation was substantial and my schedule was flexible, allowing me to work from home and just come into the office for meetings. Money cannot buy happiness, but it may provide fashionable clothing, better health care, a new home and self-confidence. I moved from normal to slightly above average, and my wife, who I already thought was lovely, was even more stunning. Our life was already good, improved considerably. We traveled more, spent more time with our children and set aside more money for retirement. Jennifer wanted to work part-time once Emily entered primary school. She swiftly secured a position at a new marketing agency. Her hours matched the children's school timetable, and we saved her income. I anticipated that by the time the kids finished from college, we would be able to retire comfortably. I learned that my wife was cheating on me 3 months before our 15th anniversary, just before my birthday. I discovered proof 2 days earlier, but did not understand it until weeks later. I hadn't given much thought to her desire to be more involved at work, which meant longer hours and my picking up the kids. It didn't interfere with my timetable, so I didn't mind. After 3 months, I noticed that she appeared distracted. She stated that she was stressed from trying to find herself at work. I took on more household duties to lighten her load. We discussed our relationship's decline. She stated that she felt older and did not need to have as much fun anymore. Our lives improved. Briefly before declining again, I hesitated to bring it up again, fearing a confrontation. I was almost at my wit's end when I discovered the gift. The weather had cooled and I was looking for a sweater. Since taking over laundry duties, I've frequently mixed up where clothes should go. While going through her closet, I discovered it behind some old shoeboxes. A pink box with a white ribbon from a lingerie store, and a postcard addressed to her beloved. A battle of ideas erupted. Should I look or wait? I decided to watch and wait for my birthday. The note reads, "Please excuse the wrapping. When I wear what's in the box for your birthday, you will be able to unwrap the real gift. Love, Jennifer." Over the next 2 days, I made an extra effort to greet her with flowers, give her foot massages and prepare her favorite dinner. Her reaction was indifferent, almost as if she had tolerated my actions. On my birthday, I made sure the kids finished their homework early to avoid interruptions. Jennifer arrived home late and asked what was for dinner, which threw me off. I suggested we go out for pizza, and the kids agreed. The waiters at the restaurant wished me a happy birthday, and I thought Jennifer's eyes were filled with surprise, but she recovered quickly. "I'll give you your present later," she said with a smile. The drive home was stressful, almost resulting in a car accident. While waiting for the kids to get ready for bed and then falling asleep, it felt like an eternity. Jennifer had gone for an emergency milk run and returned just as the kids had fallen asleep. When I got to our bedroom, she wasn't there. She emerged from the bathroom moments later wearing a flannel nightgown. Her hair was in a ponytail and free of makeup. Frustrated, I inquired about my present. She slid into bed, reached for the lamp and then stopped. "Oh, I almost forgot." She pulled a small box wrapped in balloon paper from the nightstand and handed it to me. "Happy birthday, darling." Then she turned off the light and fell asleep. I was too shocked to even open the present the next day. I became deeply depressed. I replayed the previous day's events repeatedly, unable to figure out what had gone wrong. For almost 2 weeks I wallowed in despair, with the unopened present mocking me. I had always heard the husband is the last to know, but I was truly in the dark. The thought of Jennifer cheating never crossed my mind until she called 13 days after my birthday to say she'd be late for Alan's 30th birthday celebration. I don't recall my reply, as I stared at the empty closet space where my present had been, the chest. Pain and prolonged vomiting that followed made me fear a heart attack, and for a moment I wished it were true. Liam Henderson, Jennifer's boss, was a younger, insincere advertising executive I disliked. Emily brought me back to reality. "Are you okay, Daddy?" she asked, nearly in tears. I reassured her, claiming I had a stomach issue and needed a moment. Eventually I left the bathroom, grabbed my dusty bottle of scotch, and drank enough to wake with a severe headache. I didn't know when Jennifer came home, but the next morning she was in the kitchen with the kids, as if nothing had happened. Her slight shudder, when she sat down to eat, eliminated any remaining love I had for her. I wish I could say I confronted my cheating wife, but I was too devastated. I felt like a zombie, getting worse each day watching her act carefree. I hit rock bottom until our 15th wedding anniversary, when I finally decided to take action. I probably wouldn't have done anything. I was being a wimp and knew it. If my father were alive, he'd call me a wuss and he'd be right. The fog lifted from my thoughts when my wife announced she had a work conference during our anniversary. It felt like another level of disrespect, especially since she didn't acknowledge the date. After drinking heavily on our anniversary, I woke up angry and decided to call a lawyer. I was determined to end this farce, thinking my life couldn't get worse. I was mistaken. The lawyer demolished my hopes. I had no evidence of her cheating, and even if I did, it wouldn't matter. She'd get half our assets, joint custody at best, and I'd pay alimony. She'd likely get primary custody in the house for the kids' sake. My wife was cheating and I felt like a fool. My depression turned to confusion. A few weeks later. She asked, "You really don't look well, Daniel, is something bothering you?" I lied, "No, honey." Then I got fired, which turned out to be the best thing. Watching the news, I saw a major employer go bankrupt, leaving employees without pay or pensions. It hit me, if we had nothing, we wouldn't share anything in a divorce. I decided to spend our savings until there was nothing left. It was a reckless plan, but I was desperate. 2 years passed in excruciating boredom. I realized Jennifer had been the lifeblood of our social circle. When she distanced herself, I found I had no real friends. Being an only child with deceased parents, I was truly alone for 2 years. My children were the only bright spot. I had never been a big spender, still keeping receipts for everything. I started withdrawing small amounts of cash weekly, but wasn't spending fast enough to make a difference. I was good at saving money, not spending it. I revamped my plan and stepped up my game. I enrolled in an executive MBA program, spending almost $12,000 at a local university. I paid cash for a new luxury SUV costing $6,000 and fully funded the kids' educational savings accounts for another $2,600. I splurged on a new closet and started withdrawing more cash twice a week. I dropped the kids off at school, go to the bank and head to the lake shore. I never gambled, just spent enough at the Chino to leave a trail of expenses, while stashing most of the money in a wall safe in our garage, as a post-divorce war chest. I also hired private surveillance on my wife and her lover, gathering video photos and daily reports. It was costly but worth it. Did my wife notice my spending? Mostly yes, except for the gambling. She had to sign off on the kids' custodial accounts, and she saw my new car in closet. She never questioned them, likely thinking we were still well off. She made purchases too, including more lingerie, but I never commented. We lived like tolerable roommates, communicating daily, but avoiding closeness. Spending time with my kids was my highlight. I supported their interests, did homework with them, played games, went to parks, rode bikes and watched movies. I became the home cook, involving them in easy recipes. Jennifer showed up occasionally during the week. I didn't exclude her from family time, but I didn't involve her either if she wanted to join. She did so without a word. I received weekly reports on my wife's activities. Initially I thought she was just involved with her boss, but it turned out she was with several men from her office, and eventually even some clients. Did it hurt? Not really. I already saw her as unfaithful, and having proof didn't make it worse. Liam Henderson, her boss, wasn't a skillful lover, just another participant in her affairs. She treated most of the other 6 men the same way. One client, a nerdy guy with glasses, seemed particularly rough with her, but the grainy photos and videos made it hard to tell if she enjoyed it with plenty of free time. Despite classes, kids and gambling, I focused on life after marriage. I started working out, making good gains in bench press and endurance running. While I knew huge muscles and great looks were mostly genetic, I was happy with my progress. I also researched the latest in my former industry, knowing I'd needed job. Eventually, I spent hours each day learning new technology and software. I was particularly interested in my former employer, CTS. They were stationary, with consistent revenues but no growth. If you stand stationary, you will lose. I also researched divorce extensively, particularly its effects on children. The kids had helped me get through my pain, and I wanted to be totally prepared for their adjustment. 8 months later I began to panic. My wife started driving home on schedule, inquiring about my day and dressing more provocatively for bedtime, trying to rekindle our bond. A few weeks later she grumbled about our lack of communication, and discussed improving our marriage. I answered in perfect silence. Her attempts at reconciliation lasted until her birthday. I left her gift on the dining room table, wrapped in the same paper she had used for my last gift. It should not have been a surprise. 6 months after my birthday, I finally opened her gift, an inexpensive digital watch from the convenience store's impulse buy department. I was furious at first, but when I noticed they had a matching women's model, I calmed down. I purchased both and waited 18 months to give hers. I missed her reaction since the kids, and I went out for an emergency movie night, and returned home late. She left early the following day. Everything quickly reverted to normal. She stayed late in the workplace and we scarcely spoke. Finally, she told Daniel I want a divorce. It took her nearly a week to file. Her demands were nearly comical: spousal and child support, unfair property distribution, and allegations of mental and emotional abuse. I waited until Monday, then took the kids camping for 6 days, returning rested. Jennifer was home alone in the living room, looking ill. I had filed for divorce on the basis of infidelity, requesting the house full custody and support because I was unemployed and the major caretaker. I also filed cases against her 7 partners and her employer, knowing I would not win, but hoping that the publicity would help. I also sent a DVD of her infidelity to her parents and best friend to demonstrate my seriousness. I included all of the evidence in my countersuit, but I wanted to make sure she knew the kids ate a snack and went to their rooms, ignoring their mother, who made no attempt to address them. I got a beer and sat across from Jennifer. She didn't look at me for a long time, weeping and obviously in pain. She eventually murmured something, but I was too busy enjoying my beer to notice. "You are going to ruin me." I waited for her to look up. God, I hope so. I'd expected this moment to be more dramatic, but when a tear fell down her cheek, I felt nothing. "Do you really dislike me?" she asked. "Oh no, Jennifer, I do not detest you. Hate requires effort. I devote all of my work into caring for myself and my children, but I am your wife." "Stop. My wife was a lovely, caring best friend, companion and mother to my children. She's gone. You're just a strumpet who has taken over her body. You have nothing to do with me." After a long pause, she spoke again. "What should I do now? Do you really want my response?" I proceeded without waiting. "You may move far away and begin a new life. I won't allow the kids to spend quality time with you, so leaving shouldn't be a problem. Alternatively, you may stay here, but who knows who will learn about your escapades or hire you. Perhaps some loser who doesn't care about a strumpet will take you in. You could also liquidate yourself, but I pray you won't. I want to see you suffer, but my perspective didn't matter. After you started having fun with your boss, I fantasized about this speech for months, expecting for fulfillment, as I watched her soul disintegrate. Instead, I felt hollow. Life after divorce has been precarious. The litigation went better than anticipated. I earned more than $1 million in salary from 3 companies whose staff slept with my wife. This surprised me, as my lawyer had cautioned me not to expect much. We wrecked my ex-wife's company with discovery motions, depositions and press disclosures. I also sent an email to their clientele regarding my wife and her employer. Do you really want to be involved with this company when things go wrong? Their money slowly dried up. Employees quit to avoid the controversy, and the company eventually declared bankruptcy. Alan Henderson was sacked and fled town in shame. The $20,000 compensation I won was less, but more satisfying than my previous successes. I received nothing from the foreclosure of attachment lawsuits as expected. However, 4 of the males involved were divorced. The process wounded me, as well as I was subjected to comments and ridicule from those who were aware of my condition. But I didn't care. I already felt like a loser. My primary concern was to protect my children safe from the repercussions. They were depressed for a while, but quickly recovered. My best accomplishment was returning to CTS, as VP of Design and Development Programming helped me escape my own stress. I spent 2 years developing an add-on for CTS software that connected with competitor programs. Less than a year later I founded my own firm and sold the software for $1 million, including an amazing bonus package from CTS. When I was considering retirement, I realized I needed a cause to leave the house. My new income enabled me to engage Mrs. Marlene Jensen as a housekeeper and babysitter. 1 year later she moved in with us full-time, living in an apartment above our garage. She became like a grandma to my children, offering wisdom and advice. I appreciated her support as well. I loved my children and tried to be a kind father, but I was also cynical and harsh. Mrs. Jensen was my rock, offering advice. As the children grew up, our closeness evaporated. I didn't resent them. It was preferable to keep my bitterness out of their lives. Mrs. worked with me until her children graduated from college, at which point she retired. I offered her free lodging and board as a pension. She was with us for 15 years and constantly encouraged me to find someone to spend my life with. Despite her attempts, I remained alone and she died, knowing I had never opened myself to anyone. My friendships were shallow and unfulfilling and I rarely dated, save for a few group dinners. I had a reputation as a cold, vicious individual, and I didn't blame anyone for avoiding me. My wealth permitted me to hire call girls on a regular basis. Mostly I just sent them away, but I liked one named Candy and subsequently discovered her real name was Mary Beth. When she became overly attached, I cut her loose. Jennifer had a difficult life when we separated. She attempted to reconcile or create a relationship with our children for about a year. I warned her, but she did not listen. When she stayed in Chicago, I made sure her career history was well known to prospective employers when she began dating. I sent packages to her partners containing information about her past. I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions, just as I had. She repeatedly called, emailed and attempted to contact me. A part of me wanted her to suffer. I never sought professional aid, believing it was too late. I could have changed my phone number, stopped her emails or had my assistant handle my mail, but I didn't. Her apologies meant nothing. Finally, I sent her a gift. I purchased lingerie from her favorite store, wrapped it in a white ribbon, and included a handwritten note. The card was addressed to Carl, and the inscription said "Go screw yourself." Even though my actual words were cruder, I hoped she understood the message. One of Jennifer's potential suitors attempted to hold me responsible for tormenting her. He arrived at my door drunk, and shoved me, knocking me down. This was his mistake. I had no specialized training. Never had a fight, but I was filled with rage. My ex-wife and her lovers continued to enrage me. He became an outlet for my rage. I wound up with a bump and a broken rib. He was lucky to have survived. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor, assault and trespassing and received probation as a first-time offender. His years of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation likely had a greater impact. Jennifer never contacted me again. After a year, she obtained a job cleaning rooms at a hotel in rural Virginia, 700 miles away, so I stopped tracking her. I only saw her again 16 years later at our daughter's wedding. I knew the children had reconnected with her after college. I did not stop them. Time had not been kind to her. She had put on weight, developed deep wrinkles and smoked. She appeared ancient and haggard, yet I still saw the woman I once loved. I felt nothing for her, but saw her sitting alone at the back of the church, interacting briefly and cordially with our daughter. She didn't try to speak to me, and we stayed 30 feet apart. When I saw her waiting for a cab, I noticed a small gold ring with a paltry diamond on her finger. I smiled for the first time in a long time, thinking maybe she had it better than me. I walked over and glanced at the ring, then met her eyes. A deep melancholy was obvious in her gaze. "By the way, you ruined my life," she said. I glanced at her left hand, then back at her eyes. "I'm delighted you found someone. I hope he makes you happy," I said. I walked swiftly to my car, where my driver was waiting. "Good evening, Mr. Smith. I hope you had a nice evening. Are we heading to the club?" Jonathan asked. It went as well as I had planned. Jonathan let us head right back to the house. I said I would like to be alone tonight. "Of course, Sir," Jonathan replied. As we drove away, I tried not to look back, but I caught a quick glimpse of her before saying goodbye. Daniel Smith was not a particularly attractive man, and nothing about him stuck out at first glance, but he was pleasant, attractive and intelligent, unlike the other guys. We met during the worst night of my college career, when my sorority sisters abandoned me at a fraternity party. They swore to keep together, but instead left me to mingle with the popular crowd. I waited for them for 2 hours while intoxicated men hit on me. Then Daniel approached, looked me in the eye, introduced himself respectfully, and made small chat before departing. "It was a pleasure speaking with you, Jennifer. I would want to take you out for coffee sometime, if you are interested. Here is my name and phone number. Thank you for communicating with me." That moment was the high point of my semester. I almost didn't call him, but I finally did. After a week we met for coffee and he asked me a variety of things, making it simple to communicate with him. He was intelligent and knowledgeable in every subject. He studied computer science, but could have majored in anything. He promised to help me with several of my harder subjects, particularly ancient philosophy. Daniel always looked me in the eyes, expressing real interest in me as a person. We began studying together on a Friday night. He spent 3 hours in the library helping me study for a philosophy exam. He was patient and did not make me feel foolish. When I passed the exam, he expressed genuine pride in me, saying he enjoyed spending time with me. Daniel was different than the other males. He concentrated on his studies during the week, avoiding parties and distractions. We didn't have regular dates, but he called every day and left notes for me. We gathered at the library for coffee and, on occasion, lunch. He often inquired about my family's hobbies and goals. When I asked him what he was afraid of, he said he was afraid of not being a good father. He was an only child who lost his parents in high school and lived with a non-supportive uncle. Daniel wanted to marry and have children, but he was apprehensive about his ability to be a decent father. When he grew silent, he appeared to be overly eager for an answer. He asked, "No, Daniel, that's enough." About 4 weeks into our relationship, Daniel asked if I was available on Saturdays. I answered yes, and he said he'd come over during lunch. The days leading up to that Saturday were unusual. Daniel refused to share his plans, and my sorority sisters whispered and smiled at me. I was on edge when he came. He and his 3 fraternity mates were dressed in maroon and sky blue, carrying a large cooler and food platters. Daniel presented me with a DVD, a West Ham jersey and a big smile. He requested to visit the large room in the house as we turned the corner. The house was adorned in West Ham colors and everyone began chanting. I was shocked after I grumbled to Daniel about missing my family's vacation to England to watch my distant relative play for West Ham United due to a test. He arranged for a friend at a sports bar to videotape the game. He memorized the team chants taught them to his pals and my sorority, sisters, and watched the game to determine when to begin them. They delivered English ale and cooked fish and chips. As the game progressed, we sang, drank and celebrated. In the 72nd minute, Daniel ordered everyone to remain silent and told me to watch. I watched my cousin score his first Premier League goal. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me. When it was finished, Daniel and his friends cleaned up and left. Daniel said he'd call me later. I was left alone to deal with the taunting about the dreamy expression in my eyes. It was worthwhile. Our phone, chats, notes and coffee lasted a few more weeks. One day, while sipping a latte, I observed Daniel was really apprehensive. "Is everything okay, Daniel?" "What?" "Oh yes, of course. I was wondering if you have any plans for Friday night, and if you're free, please join me for supper like a date." "I would love to have supper with you, Daniel." His expression of relief shocked me, but it was swiftly replaced by the broadest smile I'd ever seen. He continued to smile as he drank his coffee. As we stepped out and he waved farewell on his way to class, I could see him almost a street away. Since then, my life has been a flurry of love, romance and friendship. My grades have improved. I had more fun than ever and people began to approach me differently. I felt more at ease being myself, the woman Daniel loved, and people were drawn to that. Being around Daniel increased me confidence. He often complimented me favorably. Daniel was attractive, fit, well-groomed and nice, yet hesitant around new people. He was the sharpest guy in the room, even outperforming the professors. Despite this, he remained humble and spent time with me, frequently stating I'm just a regular guy who won the lottery. When we met, I thought I was pretty friends and family called me cute. I felt self-conscious, especially around my beautiful sorority sisters. However, looking through Daniel's eyes made me feel more valuable. Prom was a highlight. My sorority had a custom where each sister graded their lover in front of the alumni. I never participated because I had never had a long-term lover. This year Daniel received only positive feedback. This is a first in the event's 29-year history. I felt proud. I couldn't inform him he had won. However, due to custom, but 3 days later I discovered a way to reward him. The day following graduation, Daniel drove me home. I was originally from Chicago, and Daniel had been offered a position there. We spent 4 hours on the ride, holding hands and conversing. We paused for a short breakfast and kiss. We arrived at my childhood home shortly before lunchtime. Daniel spent the following 2 hours entertaining my folks. I was astonished when he wanted to buy my father a beer. They fled before I could object. My mother smiled through tearful eyes. "Oh Jennifer, this one is a keeper, trust me, Mom." I know Daniel and Dad smiled and laughed all the way to the front door. When they returned 2 hours later, Daniel said he'd be returning to pick me up for supper. After checking into the hotel, he quickly bid goodbye to my parents and left. The last thing he said to me was that he had asked my father for permission to marry me that night. I will never forget, it was magical. After a really romantic Italian meal, Daniel proposed to me on the Willis Tower deck. It was a lovely clear evening and the lights on the Chicago skyline nearly matched the brightness in my heart. Being made in college always brought some humiliation. I was the only sorority sister left in the home, but that night it was a valuable present part of the matched set. Daniel dedicated himself to me that night. I could feel it. He was tolerant, caring and gentle. I couldn't have imagined a more ideal contact. I asked him where he learned to be such a great lover. He continued to be modest, whispering, "I read a lot. Our lives was nearly ideal." Daniel found a decent job shortly after graduating. He was continuously getting promoted and I was happier than ever. I don't want to understate how important these years are to me. I can't find the words to describe how happy I was throughout our first decade together. I can't put into words how much having children has changed my life. I don't go into depth about those years, because they had nothing to do with my demise. In fact, telling you about those years will simply confuse you about the motivations that led to my downfall. I am aware of my blunders or, more accurately, mistakes. I understand why I fell. I didn't trust Daniel enough. What I liked best about Daniel was that he never hid his vulnerability from me. He shared his entire existence with me, including his vulnerabilities. He never hid from me. For a long time I had nothing to hide. My life was a fairy tale. My family was fantastic. Daniel never treated me differently than a full partner. I was involved in all decisions that influenced our lives. It didn't matter if he made 5 times as much as me or had a better grasp on our finances. He was continually looking to me for advice and approval. It mostly made me feel special, but there were occasions when I felt inadequate, as if I wasn't living up to my end of the agreement. I never told Daniel this. If I had revealed it, I would not have ruined my life. He'd have helped me. I know how much he loved me. He would have helped me feel complete. That small insecurity grew over the years. Perhaps it was a bud. Whatever the case, by the time the children got to school, I was lost in my own skin. I felt the desire for something unique, something that would provide me with a sense of independence. I wasn't looking for a lover in any way. I adored my husband in the bedroom. I was more than satisfied. However, our lives were full of passion, perhaps a bit of a drag. This was mostly my fault. I knew my husband wanted to be more experimental, if that's the right word. But why spoil something good? No, I wanted to feel like an equal, not simply be treated as one. So I found a job and announced that I accepted it. I'd figured it all out. I was completely prepared to defend my reasons for wanting the job. Our argument lasted only seconds. Jennifer. I think that sounds wonderful. Do whatever makes you happy, and it worked. I solved the problem on my own. I didn't need any assistance. The sheer van of my thoughts in those early months made me sick later, but it was exciting at the time. I felt prepared to face the world as an independent and confident woman. The atmosphere in our office could be described as flirty. At worst it could be described as a debauchery haven. My co-workers, both male and female, were young, outgoing and energetic. They had a few inter-office flings together. There were no relationships. Nobody seemed to hide it or think it was wrong. My boss was arguably the worst of the bunch. Liam Henderson was a pretty good-look guy, but not quite my type. People were constantly teasing him, saying he couldn't keep a girl and congratulating him on his latest conquest. I didn't jump into bed with the first guy who hit on me. In fact, I blew him off pretty hard. However, it made me wonder if Daniel and I were missing something in our lives. Our friends were relatively quiet about this. There wasn't a single conversation in our neighborhood that compared to the daily barrage I heard at work following our first Christmas party. When I introduced Liam to Daniel, my life was forever changed. I could tell they didn't like each other, even though they pretended to get along fine. I stopped speaking with Daniel about my work and never mentioned Alan. I knew my job and boss bothered him. After that night, I noticed some changes in the office. Alan began paying close attention to me, complimenting my work in public and asking how I was feeling. He started asking me to share lunch with him. We always had lengthy discussions about our latest project. He started asking for my opinion more and more frequently. Then he would ask a few personal questions before we ended the conversation and returned to work. He also started complimenting me on my appearance. In hindsight, I can say he worked on me for months and I absorbed him like a fool. I don't remember the exact series of events that led up to this. With deep regret, I admit I enjoyed every minute of it. Alan's skillful seduction made me feel desirable emotions I thought were long gone. Years later, analyzing my behavior, I realized the depth of my betrayal. I didn't feel Daniel desired me, because I didn't give him anything to desire. I knew the kind of man he was. He would never do anything to make me feel uncomfortable. I was his true partner and cherished lover, not his girlfriend for fun, but he was very perceptive. The slightest hint on my part would be enough. Any hint that I wanted something else would have had dramatic consequences. A painful analysis of my married life revealed that Daniel was obviously fumbling for any opportunity to energize our lives, and I was ignoring him. I am terribly ashamed to admit that I did all this and more for Alan. It turns out I was a strumpet to him. I got too deep into my relationship with Alan before I realized the truth. I gave Liam myself for his birthday. The contrast with Daniel was striking and changed my thinking almost immediately. Alan didn't love me, and I was making a terrible mistake. I told Alan that our affair was over. The very next day he laughed and pushed me out of his office. The package was on my desk when I returned from lunch along with a note to be in Alan's office at 50030. The contents of the package guaranteed my fulfillment. The pictures of Alan became a lock that changed me to him, and the hell my life would become for the next year and a half and beyond. Having fun with my two co-workers, who were waiting for me in Alan's office, was very pleasant compared to what I would have to do during those 18 months. Let me just say that I was the company trumpet, and Alan was my pimp, and I hated him almost as much as I hated myself. I tried my hardest to find a way out and kept failing. It was only when I could no longer accept the immorality of my actions that the solution to my problems came by itself. When I was asked to entertain a weirdo guy in a conference room full of people, I realized I'd had enough. I had found the solution that had eluded me for so long: courage. I told Liam, I've had enough and I don't care who you show the pictures to. He just laughed and it was over. I felt so stupid. I have to say that when I woke up from my nightmare, I was surprised at the state of our house. Daniel and the kids seemed to be doing just fine, without me in the back of my mind. I thought they would have a hard time facing life under the kind of neglect I had imposed on them, but it turned out to be exactly the opposite. It seemed as if I wasn't needed at all. Daniel was clearly on top of things. He had a new car, new clothes, and looked like a successful executive. I felt terrible when I realized how long I had neglected my family. I decided right then and there that I would rededicate my life to them and do everything I could to make amends for my betrayal. But a distance had formed between us that had never been there before. I often wondered how long it had lasted. Daniel never raised his voice to me. We never fought, but he treated me like an intruder. I decided I needed to put my best foot forward. I tried to seduce him. Nothing worked. He barely touched me. After a few months, I looked at the state of our marriage: no closeness, no communication. I decided I couldn't live like this. I suggested marriage counseling. Then Daniel stopped talking to me. I don't mean he stopped trusting me. He just stopped talking, not a word. For weeks I was on edge. When my birthday came around, I let myself get a little worried. After all, he couldn't ignore me on my birthday. God, how wrong I was. When I got home from work, I was ready to find out what my family had planned, but found the house empty. The only thing on the dining room table was a small wrapped box. I realized what it was before I even opened it a few years earlier. I had forgotten Daniel's birthday in a panic. I found an inexpensive watch at a store on a nearby street. I intended to rectify my oversight later, but I never did and eventually forgot about it. My gift was a mistake, but his gift was calculated by the time I went to bed. I was furious. Keeping the kids away from me on my birthday was just cruel. I couldn't believe he had done that to me, and the gift that was out of line. I should have realized something was terribly wrong. The symbolism should have been enough. Daniel was not an evil man. He was the most gentle, caring and loving person I had ever met. If I hadn't been so clouded with anger over that damned gift, I could have saved my marriage if I had confessed my sins and asked for forgiveness. Maybe there would have been hope for me. Unfortunately, at that point I stopped thinking about working on my marriage and started thinking about divorce. I was sad but determined. It took me a few weeks to work out all the details with my attorney. I told her how Daniel was aloof and even abusive, how he kept the kids away from me, ignored my requests for counseling and stopped talking to me. My attorney pounced on my comments. She said I would be well compensated. We went over the claim. I felt I was doing what was fair, standing up for what I needed to live a normal life. All that was left was to deliver the bad news. I stood silently in the doorway of the den and looked at the man who had once been my husband, my other half. He looked like the same man, but it wasn't him. Finally, I had enough. Daniel, I want a divorce. There was a long silence, but I didn't see any emotion on his face. I thought he smiled, but he was probably just in shock. He must have been, because his reaction wasn't what I expected. No yelling, no questions, okay, and that was it. The following Friday he was served with my divorce petition. That weekend Daniel was in a better mood, but if he tried to correct his recent behavior, it was too late. I was in no mood for reconciliation. He even said goodbye to me at the door, as I left for work Monday morning. Too little, too late. I thought when I got to the office I realized there was a big problem, but I had no idea what it was. My boss, the president of the company and our corporate lawyer were bickering in the conference room. Fists full of papers were being waved around. I was so busy watching the hysteria that I didn't notice the man waiting for me near my workstation. He caught me off guard when he spoke. Jennifer Smith, yes, you're being served. The man handed me a massive envelope, took my picture and left. I didn't even get a chance to sit down, let alone look at the contents of the envelope. As soon as the man left, the security guard and the human resources manager stood in front of me. Mrs. Smith, you are suspended pending an investigation on charges of inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Please gather your personal belongings and leave the building. It was humiliating to gather my belongings while my co-workers looked on. It was even worse when I was escorted out of the building. I had no idea what was going on. I barely had time to pull out of the parking lot. When my phone rang, it was my lawyer before I could even say hello. She was already letting me have it. Withholding important information and making her look like an idiot were the only phrases that made sense. I drove home in silence. When I arrived, the house was empty again. I had no idea what hell I had unleashed until I finally calmed down enough to remember the envelope. Daniel's counter-petition was crushing. Almost all of my extramarital affairs were documented. There was no money. He had spent almost all of our savings. The word that hit me the hardest was infidelity. I thought it couldn't get any worse. Then I tried calling my parents. I needed support. My father called me a strumpet and hung up on me. He didn't need to explain to me why. He thought that I already knew. The next 7 days seemed like the loneliest of my life, but years later I would remember them warmly as the happy days. Daniel left a note that I found later, claiming he had taken the kids camping and would be back on Sunday. That first night, my elder buddy, Rebecca, called at 7:00 to see how I was doing. She stated that Daniel had sent her a DVD, and that I didn't want to know what was on it over the next 3 days. My attorney emphasized the hopelessness of my predicament. I was being dismissed for cause. My firm, numerous clients and all of my partners were being sued. I would lose custody of my children. I would lose everything. At that moment I was willing to do anything to convince Daniel to stop all the litigation. I attempted to prepare myself for his return. Unfortunately, I couldn't stop crying. When the family arrived home, I was a disaster. The youngsters walked past me, as if I wasn't even in the room. Daniel stepped in a few minutes later, drink in hand, and he appeared unconcerned. I hardly forced myself to speak. "You are going to ruin me." His voice was filled with pure venom, and it destroyed me. God, I hope so. When I tried to discuss our history as husband and wife, he called me a strumpet. At that moment I wasn't even speaking to him. I was only thinking aloud, but Daniel went on a diatribe that lasted many minutes. Strumpet, trumpet, vulva cow. Every phrase ripped into me. I came. He then got up and exited the room. I can honestly say I did not give up. I attempted to straighten things out with Daniel, but he refused to talk to me. I wondered how Daniel and the kids were managing without money, but they appeared to be fine. Sometimes I'd sneak in to see him drop them off or pick them up from school. I couldn't find a job, and was getting unemployment benefits. My parents would not speak to me. I needed a place to reside, so I started going from friend to friend, mostly divorced males. Nobody wanted to keep me for long. One day everything was fine, and the next day they wanted me to leave. On the recommendation of my lawyer, I began visiting a therapist. She believed that if I repented of my actions and sought professional therapy, it would benefit me in court. I had little hope. I worked on certain things, the most of which I've shared with you, but the best advice my therapist gave me came at the end of our sessions. Her advice was to run far away. I'm not sure why he decided to respond to me. It could have been a phone call, an email, or one of the numerous letters I mailed, but for whatever reason, I returned home to find a box from Daniel waiting for me. I immediately recognized the store's usual gift box. The card was addressed to me in a very disrespectful manner. I understood everything. He knows nearly everything. He despised me and had a very precise idea for how I should best spend my time. I'm not sure why the knowledge that he knew about my willing betrayal was far worse, but it happened. I cried fiercely at the time. I was staying with a friend of a friend of a friend, a kind guy named Robert. I believe he wanted our connection to be more than just a roommate situation. When he came into the room to check what was going on, I noticed he had been drinking. When he saw the package, he grew enraged and ran out the door before I could stop him. I was concerned when Robert didn't return home a few hours later. I should have been. The nurses at the hospital were not overly talkative, but they knew the majority of the narrative. Apparently Robert went to confront Daniel, almost killed him. His face was mangled. He had a concussion, multiple internal injuries, including a fractured left hip. I felt afraid my issues were now affecting everyone around me. I told my therapist about the incident during our following appointment. She began asking me questions about Daniel. I told her all I knew. He was the lone child. He had no family. He was orphaned as a teenager. I told her about our young love and his commitment to me and the kids. I told her about his conduct over the last 2 years, when he should have known about my infidelity and subsequent behavior, and I informed her of what Daniel had done to Robert. When I finished, she looked afraid. "You need to get as far away from here as possible. Leave him alone. Do not call him. Do not write to him. Don't tell him where you are. There is no prospect for reconciliation. Do not even try move on. If you push him, he'll most likely liquidate you. Your actions have plainly damaged a man with a tenuous hold on sanity. He's been disappointed his entire life. He'll never forgive you. He will not forget." Run, and I ran. I ran away from the memories of my idyllic life to a lousy college town in Virginia, where I found an even worse job. A few years later I met a man who could tolerate me while ignoring my background. The only positive thing I can say about him is that he did not smell or strike me. There was no love between us, only a friendly friendship. I'm certain that was part of my punishment when my children were older. They called me to say hello and let me know they were still alive, as they knew I was as well. They never requested me to see them or play any important role in their lives. Daniel thrived without me. I followed his news as closely as I could. He was always a software industry superstar, with a large wealth to back it up. There was hardly nothing reported about his personal life. I saw him once more at my daughter's wedding. I was startled when I got invited. He looked incredible. He resembled the man who owned my heart and whom I had betrayed. I'll admit I was surprised when he approached me for his final brag. For the record, you have ruined my life first. He looked at my poor wedding band. At that point I regretted not wearing it on my finger. I'm delighted you found someone. I hope he brings you happiness. Then he was gone. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.